What's up mga kuya? Welcome back to the channel. So this is my full review on the POCO M3 Pro. And I'm just gonna be honest with you guys, this is probably the first time that I'm gonna be reviewing a smartphone that, to be frank, I'm not too into or hyped about. The POCO M3 Pro is kind of a hit or miss for me. And by the end of this video, I'm gonna be sharing with you guys why 5G kind of doesn't make sense for a smartphone right now. But I think the main selling point of the POCO M3 Pro, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, is that this is the cheapest smartphone with 5G right now at under 10,000 Philippine pesos or $200 US. And again, I was able to buy this at the launch for the early bird price of $7,490 or around $150 to $160 US for the 4GB 64GB variant, and is also available in a 6GB 128GB variant. For me, isn't worth it, especially at its MSRP. Of course, with the freebie of the Mi Band 5, which is a very nice smartwatch basically. And here are the specs. You guys can just pause the video. But the main specs that you need to know about the POCO M3 Pro is that it has a Dimensity 700 chipset with 5G, of course, 6.5-inch 90Hz 1080p IPS LCD display, and a 5,000 mAh battery with 18 watts of fast charging. So first, let's start off with build quality. So you have Corning Gorilla Glass 6 at the front, plastic back, glossy plastic back. So see how reflective and fingerprinty magnety that shit is. Plastic frame, which isn't glossy plastic, so I'm happy to report that. But for the most part, the POCO M3 Pro has a solid build, huge thanks to that 5,000 mAh battery. And like I mentioned in my unboxing and first impressions of this, that I was using this, or I used this with the soft clear TPU case that it came with, because this glossy plastic back will scratch really easily. I just assumed that when I unboxed this. So on the right side, we have the flat power button / fingerprint scanner, which is just a tad bit slower compared to the POCO X3 Pro, but is fairly accurate. We have the volume rockers on top of that, which are fairly clicky. On the left side, we have a hybrid SIM card tray, which you can put 2 nano SIMs or a single nano SIM or 1 micro SD card. And this actually supports dual 5G. And one thing that POCO didn't mention is if the POCO M3 Pro is water resistant or splash resistant, but upon checking, the outer part of the SIM card tray actually has a rubber seal around it, which leads me to think that the POCO M3 Pro is at least splash resistant. I'm just assuming this since again, it has a rubber seal around the outer part of the SIM card tray. So you can technically use this in the rain or in the shower. At the top, we have the 3.5mm headphone jack, which I would have preferred to be at the bottom, but oh well. IR blaster along with the secondary noise cancelling microphone. At the bottom, we have the main microphone, USB Type-C charging port, and single bottom firing speaker. At the back, you have the POCO branding here, designed by POCO, the 5G logo here, and the triple camera setup in a not so intrusive camera bump. And of course, at the front, you have the 6.5-inch 1080p display with a hole punch for the front-facing camera with a huge black outline around it. Not a fan of that, but since this is a budget smartphone, then yeah, I can't really complain. On top of that, you have the earpiece speaker grill, and you have a sizable bottom chin. And really, the only thing design-wise that I don't like about the POCO M3 Pro is that, again, it's a glossy plastic back. I mean, I don't mind again that it's plastic, but if you're gonna put a plastic back on a phone, then make it at least a faux leather finish, or just like with what Xiaomi did with the Redmi 9T, in which they made it kind of like a textured, scratch-resistant back. So in terms of build quality and design for the POCO M3 Pro, then I'm giving it a solid B. And moving on to the display, so again, we have a 6.5-inch 90Hz 1080p IPS LCD display, which gets decently bright outdoors, plenty viewable even under direct sunlight with 500 nits of max brightness. Colors are relatively neutral, which I really like, with minimal color shift at extreme angles. And in the display settings, I prefer having it in the standard color scheme, which gives it a bit of a warmer tone. And just having a 90Hz display, at least on a smartphone, especially on a budget smartphone, is just a plus, and just miles better compared to 60Hz, of course. So for the display on the POCO M3 Pro, especially considering this is a budget phone, then I'm giving it a solid A. And moving on to the cameras on the POCO M3 Pro, which really isn't a focus point for POCO, no pun intended. So at the back, you have a 48-megapixel sensor with a f1.8 aperture, 2-megapixel macro sensor with a f2.4 aperture, and a 2-megapixel depth sensor with a f2.4 aperture, alongside a dual LED flash. And at the front, you have an 8-megapixel sensor with an f2.0 aperture. And pictures taken on the main sensor are plenty sharp and detailed, but the weakness here for the POCO M3 Pro is dynamic range. So if you have a well-exposed picture, then it tends to underexpose in some parts of the picture. Like, not to the point that it would crush the shadows, but it would be significantly darker than what it is. But as long as you have good lighting conditions, then you can get some really good photos on the POCO M3 Pro. Plus, you can get some nice and detailed selfies on the front-facing camera. Although one thing I noticed with the portrait mode, so if you're using the portrait mode on the POCO M3 Pro, then as you can see, the details on my face became softer. Like, I thought there was a filter on the portrait mode here, but turns out there wasn't. It just does this with the portrait mode. And just like with most budget phones, pictures taken in low light or nighttime shots just fall apart. But you can get some okay looking shots with the night mode. And this is how the video looks like with the main sensor on the POCO M3 Pro at 1080p at 30 fps. Okay, so this is like the vlog test for the POCO M3 Pro, and what you're hearing right now is from the audio of the built-in microphone, recording at 1080p at 30 fps. Unfortunately, there's no 60 fps option, and this is with image stabilization turned on. So for the cameras on the POCO M3 Pro, it's okay. I would say solid, I guess, for a budget phone, so I would give it a B, B-. And usually in this part of my review, I would be talking about performance right after talking about the cameras on the phone. But in this case, I'm actually going to be talking about performance last, along with 5G and all those other shits. So next up is the battery life on the POCO M3 Pro, which is honestly one of the two things that I really like about this phone, the other one being the display. So again, this has a 5000 mAh battery with 18 watts of fast charging. So this 5000 mAh battery is easily a 2-day battery life for most people, and on average, if you're a light user and you're just gonna use this for social media consumption like watching YouTube videos and Twitch streams, and you're just gonna use this 4 to 5 hours a day, then you can expect to end the day with 60% left. So for the lighter users, easily a 2-day battery life. But if you're a medium to heavy user like me and you're gonna use this for social media consumption, some gaming and picture taking, then you can expect to get an average of 6 hours of screen on time and ending the day with around 40% left. But if you're a hardcore mobile gamer who's gonna use this all day and play something like League of Legends Wild Rift, then you can expect to get an average of 9 hours of straight use out of this before having to charge it. And charging it is not too bad, so with the included wall charger, you can expect to get 0 to 100 in just 1 hour and 50 minutes. So battery life on the POCO M3 Pro is easily an A+ or actually an S. And last up is the performance on the POCO M3 Pro. So this again has a Dimensity 700 chipset with UFS 2.2 storage. And again, I have the base variant with 4 gigs of memory and 64 gigs of storage. So performance in general is smooth. Of course, combined with a 90Hz display, just browsing for the UI is buttery smooth. Opening and closing apps is snappy for the most part. Multitasking and leaving several apps open in the background wasn't a problem, especially with the 4 gig variant that I have. No problems with running Genshin Impact at low settings at 60 fps. So aside from Genshin Impact, then you can play pretty much any game in the Play Store right now. So the one thing that's kind of a deal breaker for me in terms of performance for the POCO M3 Pro is consistency. So there were 2 instances where the phone would just slow down and not respond. So the first instance that I experienced is that the UI would just slow down by a lot and become a laggy mess. And the second instance is that the touchscreen just won't respond, like at all. Just like now, actually, bro. Okay, so the phone just randomly restarted right now. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to recreate those and show you guys on my B-rolls, since I usually record this part of my video before my B-rolls. But for those 2 problems that I experienced wherein, again, the UI would just slow down and the touchscreen wouldn't respond, I had to restart the phone for the problem to be fixed. So yeah, so I'm not sure if this is a problem with my specific unit, but I'm blaming the performance inconsistency on the POCO M3 Pro on the chipset, the Dimensity 700, since it is a fairly new chipset and POCO or Xiaomi hasn't really optimized MIUI for the Dimensity 700. So because performance on the POCO M3 Pro is a hit or miss, the whole phone is actually kind of a hit or miss even with 5G. And moving on to the discussion of 5G on the POCO M3 Pro. So I think like the main selling point of the POCO M3 Pro is that this is the cheapest smartphone right now with 5G. So sadly, I wasn't able to do a 5G speed test on my POCO M3 Pro with my 5G smart SIM, which makes sense since turns out our area doesn't have any 5G cell towers. And take note that I actually registered for Smart's only 5G offer for 7 days for $299. Yung nag-register ka ng only 5G tapos hindi mo mala na-experience. Sedge. But of course, that's not the problem here. I'm not complaining that I wasn't able to get a 5G reception here. The main problem is the hype with 5G, especially with companies, I think, overhyping 5G. Like I mentioned in my previous live stream, I think 5G on smartphones doesn't make sense right now. So yeah, let's say that you get to experience 5G in these areas with these kinds of speeds. Yeah, you get to download your favorite games in the Play Store really quick, but after that, then what? Would you be able to take advantage of that internet speed when playing online on your phone? What, streaming 4K videos on your phone? Like, is that a thing? Like, do you use your phone for work, like downloading large files? I don't think so. Like, yeah, even though you get these ridiculous download speeds, upload speeds and ping are still quite the same. And since 5G uses high frequency waves, even the minute that it's raining, that super fast download speed will plummet by a lot. And the same goes also even if you're just 20 feet away from the 5G cell tower. So in terms of 5G right now, especially here in the Philippines, it would make more sense if you're gonna put 5G on a device like a laptop. It kinda doesn't make sense that you're gonna put 5G capabilities on a smartphone. So why am I saying this? Well, because I see and hear that a lot of people are getting too obsessed and too overhyped with 5G. Like I see in the comments on some of my videos where people are asking if this phone has 5G, then I say no, then they say, ay ang pangit niyan, but walang 5G, dapat may 5G na yan. And another example is in Facebook posts where people are commenting, for example, Xiaomi and POCO are releasing a new phone, and in the comments of that, majority of the comments are asking, does it have 5G? Ay walang 5G, pangit yan, like I don't know. I think companies are partially to blame for this. Telcos like Smart and Globe are partially to blame for this, why people are getting too obsessed and too hyped with 5G. But believe me, like for example, if you were planning on buying the Redmi Note 10 Pro, which doesn't have 5G, then it's perfectly fine. To be honest, 5G should be the last thing you should look for in a smartphone. But going back to the POCO M3 Pro, I think POCO could have made this a really compelling option if they didn't focus on 5G. Maybe they could have just put a Snapdragon 720G in here, of course retain the 90Hz display, maybe invest a bit more in the cameras, and maybe could have put dual stereo speakers here. Oh yeah, by the way, the POCO M3 Pro only has a single bottom firing speaker which gets decently loud. But once you've experienced dual stereo speakers, then kind of like experiencing 120Hz then going back to 60Hz. But yeah, this is probably the first smartphone from POCO or Xiaomi that I can't wholeheartedly recommend, sadly. And while yes, theoretically you can improve or fix the problems with performance and the cameras here on the POCO M3 Pro with a software update, but don't base your purchase on a smartphone or pretty much any electronic gadget on the promise of a software update. So yeah, and even during POCO's global launch when they were introducing the POCO M3 Pro, it was honestly an underwhelming launch for me. And by the time that you guys are watching this video, then I most likely would have returned this by now. And if somehow you were still planning on buying this, then I highly suggest you to just go for the POCO X3 Pro. Yeah, so that's gonna do it for my review on the POCO M3 Pro. And of course, the easiest way to support the channel is by leaving a like, consider subscribing if you like my content, and turn on notifications so we can balance this out. As always, stay safe mga kuya. Thanks for watching and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.